And g'day and welcome. I'm Benjamin Morgan, the Chief Executive of the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association of Australia, and welcome back for our Tuesday, 6th of October, 2020 broadcast. Tonight we have several guests. We'll be joined a little bit later in the program by former CASA PMO, Principal Medical Officer, Dr. Rob Liddell. Rob is involved as the Medical Director for a aeromedical business in Perth in Western Australia. A business that operates Learjets, undertaking international and national aeromedical work, and we'll be gaining some insights into Rob's time as that CASA PMO and his experiences, along with his perspectives on how CASA can meet the demands of a modern aviation industry, given that we have a new Director of Aviation Safety that soon will be announced. Hopefully some insights to help that new DAS as they find their feet. We'll also be joined again this evening by none other than our resident DAME, Dr. Sean Runacres. It's great to have Sean back, and we'll be discussing some progress that we've made on member cases that we've been advocating this past few weeks. And a special guest who is joining us this evening is Mr. Gary Hill. Gary is a sport aircraft builder and pilot, and he too has been caught on the CASA AVMED treadmill trying to get his medical back after a heart attack some 15 years ago. So Gary's been out of the air for quite some time, and we'll be learning more about his particular case. Let's get Sean in straight away. Sean, g'day and welcome back to the broadcast this week.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, Ben.
Another glorious week in general aviation. I can see you're nice and excited.
Yeah, look, I am pretty excited. Nicole's had a win, which she's pretty excited about as well. So yeah, no, it's been a good week.
So I prepared a little slide here, which I might just I might put up. I know Nicole is probably at home, but there's a photograph of Nicole with her jump for joy next to the Robinson helicopter. And I did receive a really, really great telephone call today from her, letting me know that she has been issued an unconditional Class 1 and Class 2 medical. So I have to say, Sean, it is a remarkable outcome. Several weeks ago, we featured Nicole on the program to speak about her particular issue, caught on the AVMED treadmill, running around in circles, a lack of communication, a lack of direction, and of course the costs were adding up with the endless tests that she was being put through. And now we have this great outcome where AVMED have moved rapidly to resolve this issue, and they have even stepped up and covered the costs that were involved in this process.
Yeah, look at the outcome's pretty amazing. A couple of times I've spoken to Nicole, she was definitely not the happiest little camper around, but you know, we've advocated and we've done a lot of work, and we've managed to avoid her taking a 1 in 10,000 chance and dying from some of the testing that CASA wanted. And yeah, she was pretty excited. She did the testing yesterday, and I saw the report late last night. Sent it off to CASA and rang them up and chased it this morning, and they were very happy. She's been issued an unrestricted Class 1, an unrestricted Class 2. The Class 2 is now for 2 years instead of 1. She has no audit, no surveillance, no ongoing reporting required. It's as if, for all intents and purposes, this has never happened. And yeah, she's been out flying this afternoon. I haven't spoken to her since the flight, but I knew she was pretty excited about getting out.
Probably still coming down from Cloud 9, no doubt, and it really is an exciting moment for her and all of her friends, for her to be back flying. I sent her a little post on a comment, on Facebook, saying that it's been a pleasure to be able to help advocate her cause. And just on that, we have a door opening up behind you. Are we about to see a little child?
Yeah, sorry about that. I'll just fix that.
That's okay. If any of our members or industry supporters have an AVMED concern and they are experiencing difficulty in moving their AVMED case forward, we do welcome them to contact us here at the program. They can send an email through to ben.morgan@aopa.com.au. When we receive that email, we will hand some information over to our pilot medical review panel, which is led by AOPA Medical Director Dr. David Hook, and DAME Dr. Sean Runacres, our guest on this program, is also part of that panel process. So we will put that information before the panel, and we will see what we can do to help advocate your case. So don't hold back. Obviously, we're interested in getting as many pilots across the industry flying again. And as I've said to Nicole, it's amazing what a little bit of public scrutiny and public advertising that it can be in highlighting some of these problems. And it's certainly been a great motivator in helping move CASA forward. So I do thank CASA. I want to say it again, that whilst we are critical of many issues and concerns, it's also quite important that we do acknowledge that they did move like lightning when the issue became known and have resolved it. So a good outcome. Next issue that I want to have a quick chat about tonight is just an interesting piece of information that came across my desk, and that is the mysterious case of some aircraft, what may potentially be some aircraft parts that have washed up on a beach to the north of Cape Tribulation in Queensland. A aircraft avionics technician was out fishing up on the beaches up North Queensland and stumbled across a object on the beach that he recognised that may in fact be a part from an aircraft. And that information was posted out this morning via Facebook, and we sent that information across to Greg Hood, who is the Chief Commissioner of the ATSB, with a recommendation that they take a look. And I am pleased to be able to say that the ATSB did contact AOPA this afternoon, and we were able to put them in contact with the person who found these items, and they're currently taking a look at that. Just on the map there that you can see shows the general location, Cape Tribulation, on its way up to North Queensland. I'm sure there's a lot of people are going to be very keen to understand what this part is off. There's already some speculation being posted online that potentially the trim tab, what looks like a trim tab, may be from either a 737 or another Boeing aircraft. And so we'll all be standing by to learn more of that as that information comes out. One person that this information is incredibly of incredible interest to is none other than Captain Byron Bailey. And Captain Bailey has been pursuing the MH370 story for quite some time, and has some pretty unique insights into what he believes has taken place, and also the actions of the Australian government in following up this investigation. And we have invited Captain Bailey onto this program, and he'll be joining us in the next week to have a detailed discussion on his perspectives as to exactly what has gone on there. Sean, no doubt an interesting object, and one that's got the internet running around with a whole bunch of comments, and I'm sure we'll learn very shortly.
Yeah, a few conspiracy theories going on, I've seen.
Absolutely, no doubt. One other point of interest today, just in my news catch-up, is I have managed to have a quick chat with Senator Susan McDonald, who is Queensland Senator for the LNP. And Senator McDonald will be joining us next week to have a conversation about the state of general aviation in Australia, and her role as the chair of the Senate Rural Regional Affairs Transport Committee. And they currently have an inquiry which is gearing up into general aviation and the impacts on the general aviation industry and community. And so if you have not already made a submission to this inquiry, I do recommend that you do a quick Google search for that inquiry. Whilst we jump into some of the conversations with our guests, I'll put a quick slide together and I might put a link up for you, but you do need to make a submission. This is an opportunity for the general aviation industry to put its concerns forward with the way in which the industry is managed from a perspective of regulation. And it's very important that you do have your say. I know a lot of people have said, oh, you know, there's been 1,000 inquiries. Do we want to continue to keep writing this stuff if nobody's listening? I can tell you that Senator McDonald and her colleagues are listening, and this is an opportunity to put those thoughts down on the public record. We're going out and we're submitting these interviews that we've been conducting for the last 2 months, and they will be entered into the inquiry's evidence. So I do recommend that you reach out and have your say. It is critical. And it really is, Sean, that if you're a person in the industry and you're passionate about which direction we're heading, it is important that you do take those opportunities and make a submission.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in the process of trying to write mine.
I'm sure you've got some interesting perspectives on what needs to be done to AVMED, but we'll delve into those a little bit later. Well, now is as good a time as any. We're going to grab Gary Hill, and introduce Gary to our members and industry supporters. Gary, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So Gary is a sport aircraft builder, and he is also a pilot located in Victoria. And he's passionate about general aviation, but Gary himself has had a run-in with, well, not a run-in, but he's had a medical event during his time that has precluded him from being able to participate in flying. And he has joined us this evening to have a bit of a chat about that event and I guess what has followed since. So Gary, maybe the best place to start is let's start with a little bit about your background in aviation and really what interests you to be involved in GA.
Well, I've been interested in flying probably since I was building a few models when I was very young. A few friends took me flying in my early 20s. 2003, I got taken to a fly-in at West Sale and saw something called an RV being put together by a member of the company. Sent me for a fly in an RV, and that was it. I was going to build one. I didn't know I could build a plane. 2004, I started building. Started learning to fly in 2005. Got my license 2005. Had a heart attack about a month after I finished my license, and spent the next 4 or 5 years having a bit of a struggle with recovery. I knew I wasn't well enough to fly, so I didn't try. Then my wife got sick. That took a few years out, and got to about 2014, and I decided, well, it's time to start again. Still building the plane. Started doing a bit of flying with my new partner because I lost my wife. And slowly got back into it. In 2014, decided to go for another medical. Failed that. For a multitude of reasons, all different reasons every time I fail, which is strange. I tried again 2015 with a different Damie. Many tests, repeated tests, like months of diabetes testing. I've never had a problem with diabetes. I am on medication for it, but I'm borderline diabetic. I've never had a problem. I ended up at Alfred Hospital, the Baker Eddy Institute, so looked at me and went right through me and said, we would never have considered you diabetic. And yet I had months of tests, all of which I passed with CASA, and they still didn't like it. Fine, leave it for a while. Tried again later. 2009, I had to have a pacemaker installed. CASA don't mind the pacemaker, it's not the problem. They have a problem, I think Sean might explain it better. They have a problem with the defibrillator. The top of the range pacemaker comes with a defibrillator. I'm glad I've got it in there, but it's the main stumbling block for flying. So I've had no problems at all with my heart for 15 years. Physically, I've no problem riding a bike uphill at 13,500 feet. Physically, I'm still working. I'm a metal worker. I do a lot of office work now, but I'm still fairly active, fit, healthy. I've had no discernible problems in 15 years. I've gone back and had more tests, more medicals. Oh yeah.
Well, look, there's a little bit to unpack there. So I think we've got a fairly broad snapshot, but we've got a medical event that took place around 15. What's actually, you said it's the anniversary. 15 years ago, you had a heart attack. You elected to effectively self-isolate yourself from the aviation industry to allow a recovery, and for the past 10 years, you've been seeking to get back into flying and to get a medical to allow you to fly, but you've been trapped, as I say, on the AvMed treadmill, and you're going nowhere. And Sean, you and I were talking about this earlier, about Gary's case. It's highly likely that if Gary was based in the US or the UK, he may very well have already been issued an unrestricted license to get him back flying again.
Yeah,
not license, he's a medical.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that if we just sort of tease out Gary's history a little bit, he comes up with two problems that CASA are unhappy about. And the first is that he has a defibrillator. And for those of you that don't know, a defibrillator is that bang machine that you see everybody go clear for. He's got one sitting in the middle of his chest, or on the left-hand side, which if Gary was to have a cardiac event, could potentially fire. Now, the objection that CASA have raised is that if this were to fire, then he would potentially obstruct the controls. Now, when these things fire, they fire once, they fire twice, but they don't fire in a continuous manner. So I find it very difficult to reconcile this. CASA's position with exactly what's going on. Now, when we tease out his situation, what Gary doesn't have is he doesn't have any medical clearance to fly. And what he's actually seeking is that scenario where he has to fly with a qualified pilot. Now, fortunately, his current partner is a qualified pilot. And so he would quite happily accept a restriction which says he can only fly if there's somebody able to take control of the aircraft who's fully qualified. CASA won't issue that to him because of the defibrillator. Now, the interesting thing is that he's allowed to get in an airplane with an instructor, and he tells me he's done this on a regular occasion and fly an airplane under instruction, but he's not allowed to fly with his partner looking after him. And the reason being is that instructors undergo extra training. Now, I'm not sure what extra training they have in moving passengers away from controls in a debilitating event if it were to occur. I think that's just a manage an emergency kind of situation. So that's the first thing that's going on for Gary. The second thing is an ejection fraction. Now, this is a bit technical, but essentially every time your heart beats, it fills with blood and it spurts some blood out. The question is, how much blood does it spurt out? And what we know is that an ejection fraction where 60% of the blood that's in your heart is spurted out, that's considered a normal ejection fraction. In Australia, if you've got an ejection fraction below 50%, you're not suitable to fly. In America, if you've got an ejection fraction below 40%, you're not considered safe to fly. So between 40 and 50%, they'll give you an unrestricted medical. They'll keep a close eye on you. They'll watch you probably a little bit more regularly, make you undergo further testing. But an ejection fraction of 40 to 50% is tolerable in the States. Gary has an ejection fraction of 45%. So he's right 42. In that middle of that 40 to 42, beg your pardon, 40 to 45 range, would quite happily get an American medical, can't get an Australian one. And I believe, I'm not sure on this, I believe he'd also get the UK one. And I'm not sure what they say about the defibrillator, but he could go as a with safety pilot and quite safe.
There's a couple of issues, Sean, that I see with this, and obviously one of them is that Gary right now could walk across the road to the RAOs and could pick up an RAOs license to fly a 2-seat aircraft outside of controlled airspace, unrestricted, not a problem. And yet here is a participant of the general aviation industry. The guy's an engineer. He's built his own RV. I've seen the aircraft. The aircraft is impeccable. And I would have no hesitation, absolutely no hesitation in climbing in any aircraft that Gary has built. But here's a guy that has a very, very strong interest in aviation and is clearly an engineering individual who pays attention to detail, had the sense of mind to self-isolate given his medical history and wait time to work out whether he was in a risk. And for the past 10 years has sat around unable to fly an aeroplane. I mean, I look at this and I think to the discussion I'm going to be having shortly with Dr. Robert Liddell, the impact on the general aviation industry by denying people who are perfectly fit and healthy from being able to go and use their aircraft and as a result then make the investments into the aviation industry by way of the consumption of aviation fuels, aviation maintenance hours, going into flight training schools for upgrading of their licenses and their currency, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is having a big negative impact. And yet I wonder how many more years we would wait, and would Gary be simply looking at a case of look back at his life in another 10, 15 years and say, wow, I could have been flying for 25 years without a medical event?
Yeah, there's definitely something in that. And he's clearly gone 15 years without anything of any substance or significance that would flag him any further. Yet, now, I don't deny that he had an event 15 years ago, and I don't deny that he's at higher risk. But is he at that risk that, what's the words CASA uses, at a threat to air safety navigation? I'm not convinced he's there at the moment. The cardiologist that we use isn't convinced that he's there at the moment. Yeah.
It's frustrating, Sean. It is. I mean, it's the same with the issue of diabetes in pilots, and there are so many other issues in which CASA appears to have adopted a risk percentage. And I'd love to know where these risk percentages come from, because, you know, again, my argument is that they're basing their position on a piece of data, yet the reality data that they really should be looking at is sitting right in front of them, where they have their own examples where they've grounded pilots. Those pilots have sat around for years and there've been no events. And so there's clearly, you know, either the data sample size that CASA have been historically using is not sufficient, or they're making decisions that are just not backed up with the reality of how it plays out.
Can I jump in there? Number of things. AvMed have never looked at me. I am extremely highly monitored, right? I have a device that sits beside my bed. It interrogates this pacemaker every night. It reports direct to my doctors. They know at the same time as I will that something's wrong. I see my pacemaker specialist twice a year. He only just checks me and says, we'll see you in 6 months. I see my cardiologist once a year. He said I'm a model patient. You know, I'm trying to find a reason why I shouldn't fly, and I can't find one. My cardiologist says I'm fine. My pacemaker specialist says I'm fine. My GP says I'm fine. Two namies, well, more than two namies have said I'm fine to fly. I'm trying to find a reason why I shouldn't fly, and then I'll leave it alone. So I'm quite happy to be their guinea pig. I'm highly monitored, very conscious of not doing the wrong thing. If I was going to do the wrong thing, I would have been flying all this time. I'm not. Very, very frustrating.
I've seen plenty of people a lot sicker than Gary come through the door and go flying. I do struggle to understand what's going on in Gary's case.
Okay, well, this might be a fantastic opportunity to bring in our fourth guest this evening, none other than Dr. Robert Liddell. Rob, you're not exactly an unknown in this aviation industry. You're a former AOPA Australia medical director. You're a former medical director or aviation director of medicine, or whatever the acronym is, the PMO, principal medical officer for CASA. And you've been actively involved in this aviation industry. And all too often in my travels, when I'm speaking to pilots and aircraft owners about medical issues, your name will come up as someone that they've sought the assistance of and to have a conversation with. You obviously have a depth of experience, having worked inside of the regulator and having obviously worked outside of the regulator with the industry. And we are really keen this evening to hear some of your insights into your time inside of CASA and maybe how CASA can be changed to move the industry forward. So I'll hand over to you.
Oh, thanks very much, Ben. It's interesting listening to Gary's story. All a bit too common, unfortunately. I mean, there's a lot of conditions which preclude people from flying as solo pilots, but recognising that Gary's apparently quite happy to fly with a co-pilot, it's a bit surprising and sad that he can't. Many years ago, when I was just taking on the role of company doctor for an airline in the UK, I was having a meeting with a gentleman called Jeff Bennett, who was the Chief of Aviation Medicine in the United Kingdom. And his office was on the Strand in London. And he took me up to the window, and we were talking about ASA with Copilot, which the UK was the only place that actually had that condition at the time. And he took me up to the window and he said, just come over here and look down there. And we looked down on the Strand with all the people in London sort of struggling along the Strand. And he said, you know, every one of those people down there is a class 2 ASA with a co-pilot in terms of risk. And he was absolutely right. In fact, in private flying, if you've got another pilot that can fly with you at the controls of an aeroplane, you know, like a standard dual control aeroplane, the risk of one of the pilots becoming incapacitated is totally covered off by the fact there's another pilot. And as he said, any one of them without a medical would meet the risk target for a class 2 ASA with co-pilot. And Jeff Bennett was an aviation person of great sort of international renown. He was also a pilot himself, and he moved the UK forward a long way in terms of being out in front in having certificates like ASA with co-pilots and things like that. So you know, it's sad. No, and we aviation medical examiners have fought for a long time to get people back flying who we know would be having to fly as with a co-pilot, but they're not given that approval, and we think that the level of risk has been badly miscalculated.
Well, look, Rob, we have a new DAS, obviously, that is soon to be announced, and obviously they're going to come in and they're going to be trying to find their feet. But at the same time, we have a new DAS that's incoming. We've just lost our current CASA PMO, Simon May, who has departed the organisation, and we've extended an invitation to Simon to join us on this program at a later date to talk about his experiences internally. What we've seen as an industry from the outside, and I think it's really abundant to anyone that spends any time interacting with AvMed, is that AvMed appear to be a department within CASA that's in crisis. It is not delivering in a timely fashion. It appears to have a huge communication problem, which is creating huge frustrations for the aviation industry. I mean, has the situation deteriorated since your time, or do you view what it seems to be going on with a level of understanding?
Well, Ben, when I took up the job as Director of Aviation Medicine, which is what the PMO's position used to be called, my predecessor was the original Director of Aviation Medicine, and he'd been there for about, 20 years or so. And I think that I was there for about 7 years, and Jeff Brock followed me he stayed for another 2 years, and then the time in the slot got less and less. And you've got to ask the question, why have we got a revolving door of principal medical officers? Some of them should be revolved out, like the predecessors to Simon, the gentleman, Pushan Navathe, and the other gentleman from New Zealand. They just made the whole thing far more restrictive than it needed to be. But when I joined what was then the CAA, we didn't have a medical certificate, and that was a problem for us in the legislation in terms of flexibility for aviation medicine. And while I was there, we brought in the legislation to have a medical certificate that the medical people could put a condition on, and the person was allowed to fly. So we sort of disconnected the medical side from the operational side. So you'd have a license and you had to have a medical certificate. And prior to that, it was all part of the one thing. And that gave us the ability to bring in the ASA with co-pilot, which we did. And that immediately gave us fantastic flexibility, both class 1 and class 2. we use that to great effect. But and I might say that, to my knowledge, there's never been an accident in either a commercial operation or a private operation where somebody who had a a restriction or a condition to fly as or with a co-pilot has become incapacitated and there's been an accident. On the occasions when that might have happened, always the other pilot has completed the flight safely. So there's never been a problem. So you could argue that this condition placed on medical certificates should be even used more frequently. And cases like Gary's, I mean, Gary could have been flying for the last 15 years. I mean, clearly Gary's got a cardiac problem which may not meet international standards for Class 2 operations. But if you put him with another pilot, whether he's flying pilot in command or just the other pilot, you should be able to say, well, we've met the risk level, and he could have been flying for the last 10 to 15 years. So it's the incredible conservative attitude of the people in AVMed, and they've got the call. When I was there running AVMed at the time, we tried to be flexible. We tried to look at people's what operations are involved in and tried to keep them in the air.
So, Rob, I've got a couple of. I'm just going to be cognizant. I've only got you for a very short, narrow window before you've got to run off for work. But I've got a couple of quotes here that I want to read you, and I want to just get some reflection from you. And one of them, I'll just go through maybe each quote. I'll get a few comments. We'll move through them. The first one was this. It says, the micromanagement of every recreational pilot with type 2 diabetes has driven many of them out of the industry, increased the cost of regulation with extra staff and resources to pour over the submitted daily blood sugar sugar results, which have already been checked by the DAME, and achieved nothing for aviation safety. Like the rest of the population who trust their doctors, CASA needs to trust its medical examiners and to stop wasting funds on over-regulation of pilots. If they diverted the savings into teaching pilots about airmanship and sound decision-making, only then might there be a positive effect on aviation safety. Now, I think you could, in looking at that statement, we could remove the concept of type 2 diabetes, and we could virtually insert now just about every form of medical ailment that now sees private pilots being guinea pig tested for everything from sleep apnea to sleep deprivation. In some cases, I heard there was an erectile function test being ordered, to all manner of heart tests and everything else. I mean, you know, obviously this was written by you quite a number of years ago. The situation has gotten much worse since then. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, I mean, for diabetes, you could insert sleep apnea. I mean, how many private pilots have spent thousands of dollars on having sleep apnea tests because their neck's too thick or their BMI is 35 plus? Do we have a statistic for private pilots falling asleep and crashing aeroplanes? Not one ever, to my knowledge, or to the Bureau of Air Safety's knowledge. Head injury. There's a lot of conditions where people have just walked away due to the incredible cost of trying to meet CASA's requirements. And just on
that, Rob,
yeah.
I want to press on that issue because I have sat in front of Senate RRAT hearings on these medical issues, and I know that the senators will in fact be watching this broadcast. So I want to ask you the question directly. In your experience, do you feel that the industry has lost pilot participation, that is, pilots have left this industry because CASA AVMed have made those medical application and retesting processes too difficult, too expensive, and too onerous?
It's not my opinion, Ben, it's a fact. I know many pilots, and I'm sure Sean knows many pilots who have just walked away. They said, too hard. You know, I've done all these tests and still they're not happy. And we're mainly talking about private flying here because they're the guys that don't earn any money from their flying. they support a whole bunch of people whose income is derived from looking after aircraft and being part of the general aviation scene. But I know many pilots who have, so they've maybe retired from work and now's their time to spend some of their hard earnings in aviation, and then they get denied that for something which is a ghost. It's not even a real problem. There's no statistic for accidents or safety issues, and sleep apnea is a classic. And I think CASA's ability to make great difficulty for people for reasons that they never seem to have to substantiate. They never have to say why they're doing this to the aviation community, because it's not safety related. And
Rob, it certainly appears that...
Ben, I was just going to say that I have said to CASA staff many times, the senior people, I've said that the money that many private pilots spend on meeting the medical standards that CASA demand of them, that money is basically wasted. That money comes out of their allocation for flying. And so the effect on their overall aviation safety, because they're now not current, because they haven't got the funds to spend flying aircraft, puts a negative effect of CASA on aviation safety, because these people have accidents because they're now uncurrent. CASA have really the aviation medicine side is actually having a negative safety effect, not a positive effect as they should have.
You've just answered the very question I was just about to ask you, which was that obviously that these tests and the costs involved in all of this testing, and I mean, I'm not a medical expert, but to be perfectly honest, after 4.5 years in the chair with AOPA, I can't help but come to the conclusion that CASA are running some kind of scientific experiment and are using the private pilot community for generating some form of statistical something that they are driving a whole raft of tests because they're fishing. They're just looking for data, and they're making the pilot community bear the burden and the costs involved in this. And frankly, I think that's wrong. I think if the government wants to run tests with a view to obtaining an insight, then they can pay for those processes instead of forcing that impost on us. Next quote I want to hit you with here is, quote, "The dangerous result of CASA's draconian regulatory measures is that now many pilots tell CASA as little as possible about any medical problems in order to protect themselves from the expense and repetitive investigations or possible loss of certification. Most pilots are responsible people, and they do not desire, and they have no desire to be in charge of an aircraft if their risk of incapacity is unacceptable. When their DAMI and their specialists believe they meet the risk target for certification without endless further testing demanded by CASA and the advice of their own specialist is ignored by the regulator, then the pilots lose confidence in the regulator itself." Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, that's totally true. Who said that?
You.
Yeah, I thought I might have. That is exactly a situation that all of us as medical examiners see, and we will get pilots who will come in and say, "Oh, look, we know what CAS is like, so I'm just going to withhold something," and we would probably say, "Well, you shouldn't do that," and they say, "Yeah, but look what CAS have done to all my friends," and so they would withhold information. Whether that information they're withholding is of any relevance, I mean, for some of them, it's little stuff like, they had a gallbladder out, or they had some other sort of thing which won't affect their certification, but they're so concerned about what CASA might require of them that they think they make their own assessment. Basically, they think this is not an aviation safety matter. I'm not at risk of increased risk of incapacitation. I'm not going to tell CASA because it'll just cost me money, and I know aviation safety won't be improved. So, yes, certainly there's a lot of that goes on. And the comment that, we all thought that things were going to turn around beautifully when CASA came out and said, and I think it was Rob Walker or Mark Sullivan who really were a bit of a positive light in CASA. They weren't doctors, but they put a bit of pressure on the doctors to sort of be reasonable. And when we had this thing that Class 2s were going to be able to be certified by DAMIs, no question asked. Now, that was fantastic news, because we know we make DAMIs have training. So why should CASA be second guessing these people when the trained DAMI who's looked at the person in warm flesh says, yes, I believe they meet the standard? I mean, that DAMI's not going to be certifying someone who they believe is a risk to aviation safety. And we all thought that would be fantastic. So what happened? The thing came in, everyone thought we're away now, and CASA kept dragging through the medicals that were submitted and still applying all their ridiculous extra tests in many cases. And so they gave and then took away this ability of the DAMIs to certify Class 2s. And I know for a fact there will be many, many pilots flying happily today and safely today if CASA had managed to keep their sticky fingers off the medical certification of those pilots.
Well, I have a fantastic example, and I'm going to jump across to Sean in a second. I could see him nodding feverishly at those comments. I could see, I know where he's going. But, I had this fantastic example where, and I agree with you, Rob, that when CASA came out and said we're going to allow the DAME to effectively overrule CASA and say, no, I'm satisfied, let's get this guy flying again. I had DAMEs within literally the first weeks of the system being put live, contacting me saying, I'm being pressured. And I'd be saying, what are you talking about? I said, Ben, I'm getting phone calls from CASA AvMed on medicals that I've said, no, I'm allowing it. And AvMed have been pressuring me as the DAME saying, you shouldn't be signing this person out. And they could not believe that they were getting pressure from CASA to countermand their decisions that they made as the physician responsible for the pilot, especially given the fact that they actually see the pilot, they're monitoring the pilot, they know the pilot, and the people at AvMed have never met them, wouldn't know them even if they crossed them in the street, and would have very, very little understanding on their medical histories in reality. And so I was shocked. That this was not a liberation of the system and a reform. It was almost like a quick lick of paint that from 20 feet looked good, but when you got up close to it, you realised it was really, really horrible. Sean?
Yeah, so when this first came out, I actually contacted CASA to try and find out exactly the details on how it was going to work. And I got an email back that says a DAME delegate has CASA's powers and functions in relation to a Class 2. So essentially, I become the regulator. I make the decision and issue the medical. Well, I have issued medicals that have been pulled. Not, you need to change it, but actually, we don't like this decision you've made, and we're going to revoke it. So there's actually no point in me making that decision because I go to a pilot, hey, I think you're fit to fly, and then CASA rings up the pilot or emails the pilot and says your medical certificate has been revoked. I mean, I've got pilots on my books now who are asking me for help to get a Class 2 because their Class 2 basic has been revoked. It's ludicrous.
The system is definitely broken. I'm going to bounce back to Rob, my last quote for you to respond to tonight. Here we go. In my opinion, this is you. In my opinion, the most urgent requirement is to rescue the private and recreational sector of the industry by altering the management of the Class 2 medical certification system. The certification of private pilots in Australia is now well out of step with what I have experienced in other major aviation countries such as the USA and the UK. Your thoughts?
Yes, well, I believe it is, and I mean we're not trying to sort of become unsafe here. We're all responsible human beings, and I think one of the big problems in AvMed is that most of the doctors who make decisions have got very little knowledge or interest in aviation in terms of being an aircrew member. And I believe that's so important because people who don't fly aeroplanes, light aircraft, any sort of aircraft, often have a unrealistic idea as to what sort of a superman or woman the pilot has to be to operate an aircraft safely. And in fact, when I was running AvMed, I made it a rule that those doctors that worked for us had money in the budget to do 2 hours flying training every month, just to make sure that they knew what they were talking about when they were talking about flying aeroplanes. And most of the doctors in AvMed these days, the most they've ever been is a passenger. There's very, very few pilots occupy those roles. And I think that's a great worry. And for that reason, I think, and I've been at CASA for many years without any success, we should have what they have in the UK, and that's a medical advisory panel, which sits on apart from the management side of CASA, but has authority over aviation medicine. And that medical advisory panel would be aviation medical examiners who are also pilots, and who are well-known members in the aviation medicine community. And anybody who has a problem with CASA being totally unreasonable, sure, they can go to the AAT now, but most people, the cost of that is horrendous, even though it's supposed to be free, but just getting involved is horrendously expensive. An aviation advisory panel, they should be able to appeal to, and that panel should be able to discuss the case, get the principal medical officer in from CASA to put his or her point of view and make a decision. And I'm sure that there are many people like Gary, for example, where that panel would have said, look, in terms of system safety, this man, certainly with a multi-crew endorsement, well and truly meets the medical standard. And I think until we get that, we will always be at the suffering just simply as to the personality and the makeup of that person who sits in the PMO's chair.
Well, Rob, I mean, clearly there is a problem. Clearly there is a problem with AvMed. There have been too many PMOs pass through the door. The revolving door has spun pretty wildly. And now we've just lost Simon May, and Sean and I were both very big supporters of Simon, as he brought in a pragmatism that very much reminded me of you. But he was well respected by the general aviation community and supported by the community, but has stunningly walked away, and nobody yet knows the story. And I think it's actually in the public's interest that that story be told, because there are a lot of rumours abounding that as PMO, he was struggling with an organisation in which the middle layers of AvMed were literally going around the head PMO directly to legal, Dr. Jonathan Aleck's office, to seek outcomes directly with legal and the CEO to countermand the PMO's pragmatism. And I think if that, and again, it's rumoured, but if that was what was going on inside of CASA, it really is sending a very loud signal, not just here to Australia. This is a loud signal right across the world that there is some serious dysfunction going on inside of the AvMed division. And we know as industry participants that we're feeling that dysfunction almost on a daily basis. Any thoughts?
Yes, well, and this is why I come back to this medical advisory panel, because it should not really be. It's too important, even having been in the role and had the power of the Director of Aviation Medicine, which was great, but it shouldn't really be on one person's judgment. And this is why we need a panel, a group of people who can come together and help steer AvMed in a reasonable direction. Because if you get a guy like Simon May and his predecessor, and Ian Ho's good guys from the past who've been in there and basically just thrown up their hands and walked out the door, that shouldn't be the way it is. So it shouldn't depend on one person. It should be a group of people who set the direction for AvMed, and I'm sure that if that was done, we'd be getting better outcomes.
Well, I certainly agree with your quotes earlier that we do need to rescue private and recreational aviation, which leads me to the last question that I have for you for this program, which is that in Australia we have a recreational flying community that's now been split by CASA into part self-administration and then part central CASA regulation. And those that exist outside of the CASA system have been allowed to fly on a self-certification medical standard, and that is outside of controlled airspace in largely two-seat aircraft. This has been going on now for over a couple of decades. It's proven itself to be a safe alternate. CASA, by accepting that, is demonstrating it is safe. Otherwise, they are duty-bound not to allow it if it's unsafe. Should CASA be modernising and introducing a self-certification medical standard for recreational pilots, and in doing so, streamlining and simplifying the initial entry point for pilots into the system and driving further reforms into the Class 2 to try and reinvigorate private recreational flying?
So the question is?
The question is, should we be seeing CASA move forward with a self-certification medical standard that recreational pilot licence holders under the CASA system can access?
Right. Yes. Look, it depends where people want to go with their flying, and there's a lot of people that come to me and say, "Look, I can fly around the country town where I am and go to other country towns. I don't even want to go anywhere near controlled airspace. It frightens me. Basically, I just like flying aeroplanes." And those people are not much different from your glider pilot or your ultralight or your recreational pilot. And the system has shown that self-certification works. I mean, the concern that CASA's got, I suspect, is that some people might use it as the thin edge of the wedge to get into the more, the higher class of aviation operations. But I don't know. I don't see that. That's not what I hear from people. People who want to go into the higher levels of aviation, whether private or commercial, they're pretty straight up and down. They're prepared to sort of jump through reasonable hoops, not some of the unreasonable hoops that are put in front of them today. But people who are at the other level of aviation, self-certification would appear on the history, as you point out, to be a safe option.
Well, with response to the thin edge of the wedge, it is, if you look at the Civil Aviation Act, CASA's responsibility is to promulgate aviation safety regulations to enable the safe conduct of aviation. That's what they're there to do. They're actually not there to tell the industry what we can't do. They're actually there to provide the framework to allow us to do the things we need to do, but to do them safely. And I think there definitely needs to be a cultural and intellectual reset amongst the CASA hierarchy, because they certainly seem to have gone off the reservation and are in the wilderness somewhere, I guess, looking for themselves. Dr. Rob Liddell, thank you very much for making some time with us. I understand you're extremely busy. I know there's a lot of people from across the aviation industry that will be looking forward to hear some words from you and also to see you again. And obviously on behalf of the AOPA Australia board, we again thank you for all of the time that you put into AOPA and assisting our members. So thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Ben. Cheers.
No problems. That was Rob Liddell with some very interesting views. I mean, Sean, obviously CASA AVMED really at this point in time appear to have their hands full.
Yeah, they do. I was just thinking, can we convince them to take the job back? I mean, there's a vacancy at the moment. Let's have somebody reasonable, experienced, pragmatic, and give them some power to act. As I say, I have not had a lot to do with Simon personally, but the story that I get consistently is he didn't have the power to do what he wanted to do. So, even if we find the best PMO and put them back in the job, we're going to have the same problem if we don't actually fix the board structure, the legal structure that that just puts a stymie on reasonable solutions.
Well, Sean, the thing that bothers me with it most of all is really, I guess, if I have to, well, not that I have to, I'd like to talk about it, and that is my concern is the actions of the CASA CEO DAS in allowing Simon to walk away from the organisation. And I know a little bit about what went on, and I won't speak publicly about that. I really would prefer to see Simon come on the program and speak for himself with respect to that. But what concerns me with the DAS CEO is that instead of trying to seek to understand the concerns that were being put in front of him with regard to that position, the answer was to simply accept a resignation or accept a non-renewal of contract and let the person go. And I think it's a huge tragedy, because I think CASA could have learnt some pretty significant lessons from actually taking on board what Simon was putting forward, and I also believe a couple of other staff members were putting forward to try and move AvMed into the current century, and then obviously make it a little bit more efficient. So I really think that it shows a real failure of CASA leadership to recognise that they are actually in a state of crisis with AvMed, and that they do need to address this.
Well, I mean, there was no PMO for 18 months. There was 2, possibly 3 acting PMOs after Dr. Drain left in 2018, 2017, whenever it was he went. So it took them 18 months to find a candidate. There were a lot of rumours about candidates interviewing for the position, being offered the job and turning it down. And then we got a bloke who was good. We got a bloke who was really good. And, you know, if you've met my wife, you know that if you get something good, you hang on with 2 hands really tightly. You don't let something that good get away. And you know, CASA really had an opportunity, both with Mark Sullivan and Simon May. Something really good was happening. Now, it's a large bureaucracy. Nothing happens overnight, but good things were happening. And anybody who actually believes in aviation would have hung on to both of them with 2 hands bloody tight.
Well, look, you know, I mean, on the broader sense with all of this, Sean, it's absolutely clear that the board of CASA need to start taking and paying a much stronger detail of attention to what is going on inside of their organisation. You know, I've sent an email recently through to Tony Matthews, and I know my relationship with Mr. Matthews as the chair of CASA is tenuous. Again, I reiterate that I have an open invitation for Tony to sit down on this program at any point in time and to take questions from AOPA on behalf of the industry and to answer them. I don't know whether Tony is going to stomach up to that challenge anytime soon, and I'm disappointed by that, because I think that the industry could benefit enormously from hearing him answer questions directly on how his organisation is being managed on behalf of this industry. But I think that board really needs to start paying attention to what is happening at a senior management level, and it needs to look at the turnover issues of the staff and start investigating in absolute detail as to why people are leaving. I've even suggested that I think that the Senate Rural Regional Affairs Transport Committee should invite Simon to come before the Senate and to take questions and to provide an overview of his time inside of CASA, and for him to be given the opportunity to provide a very open and candid and honest appraisal as to what is going on inside of the organisation, because clearly things are not adding up. We've seen, you know, several years now of statements from the outgoing CEO DAS that everything's great. What a great job we're doing. We've improved so much. Industry loves us. Look at how well we're doing. I mean, frankly, it's garbage. It's garbage, and nobody believes it. And the sad part is nobody believes it. The only people that seem to believe this stuff are the people who are writing it, because no one else can take it with any degree of seriousness, because the actual reality of the industry versus how CASA see themselves are 2 completely different contrasts. And I have to say that the problem is not on the industry side. I do not believe the industry have they're thinking so out of shape and so wrong on this that they're so coloured. I think that the problem truly and honestly is the way that the regulator is being managed and run.
Yeah, no argument with me with any of that statement. Absolutely not.
Well, it's been another great program and an opportunity to learn a little bit more from Rob. Gary, on your particular front, both Sean and I will reach out to CASA AvMed in the days after this broadcast, and we'll be seeking an opportunity to have your medical case reviewed and for a fresh set of eyes to be put on it. With the fact that Simon is no longer PMO, we've got no idea who's in charge at the moment and where that may lead us. But Sean and I will definitely take up the torch on it for you.
Okay, a couple of questions for you to ask them. Really simple. What do AvMed know about my health that I don't know and my specialists don't know? Right? When am I going to have a heart attack? You know, question one. Question two is I get told I get sent off to the complicated case committee every time I apply. Whatever it's called. It's CSEC, whatever.
Complex case.
That's it, complex case committee, right? How many of those people ever got in a plane, and how many of them are legal people? Are they doctors? Are they I don't know. Nobody knows who they are.
Well, I'll tell you what we might do as a point of interest, and I think this actually would be a real point of interest for the industry, is we might try and get a list of who all the doctors are that are on the complex case committee so that we can actually see who's involved there. Have we lost you, Gary?
No.
Oh, I think we just lost Gary's feed there, Sean.
All right. No worries.
Look, mate, thank you very much again. And our next broadcast is actually tomorrow. Tomorrow, I'm being joined by the leadership team of the Sport Aircraft Association of Australia, and they'll be spending some time to explain their submission to the Senate Rural Regional Affairs Transport Committee's inquiry into general aviation, in which they have called for a radical overhaul of the recreational space in bringing back under central regulation the recreational community on the back of reformed pilot medical and pilot licensing standards. So that's set to be a fantastic conversation. Tony White and his team will be there. I guess you'll be able to hear it directly from the horse's mouth. And I invite our members and industry supporters to be around, put your questions and comments in, because it is sure to be a reasonably controversial topic. So, Sean, thank you again for your time, mate. Really do appreciate it.
Anytime.
And I look forward to seeing everyone again as we continue these broadcasts. So thank you.
Good night.